Hello and welcome to another episode of Laptop Retrospective, and today I have a long-awaited follow-up video. The machine that we have here is actually the X240, and many years ago I reviewed it, and you can see that video linked up in the corner there. And I'm happy to say that it is now time for us to take a look at the X250. I think this is the X250. Now, the reason that I say that is because these machines visually are nearly identical. If we take a look at, and we don't normally start here, but we are going to today. If we take a look at the port selection, it is identical. So we do have the mini display port, USB 3.0, VGA, the CPU exhaust fan, and then our rectangular Lenovo charging port. Along the back, we have absolutely nothing. And then on the right-hand side, we have our Kensington lock slot, we have our gigabit Ethernet, SD card, SIM card slot, and USB 3.0, and finally the headphone microphone combo jack. The only differences that you would be able to tell externally from these machines is actually once we open the lids. So the obvious thing that we need to address is that they fixed the trackpad. And yeah, we're gonna say fixed. This was not a good user experience. It was mushy. The dedicated buttons being absent for track point was regrettable, to say the least. However, all the other features are sustained. So they have fingerprint readers on both. They have the track point, obviously, the same keyboard, and unfortunately the same keyboard disassembly method. If you're not familiar, you pretty much have to take the entire machine apart to pull the keyboard out of this. It's not like the other keyboards in this generation where you can just move it up and, access some screws. No dice. Let's go ahead and put the X240 away and take a much closer look at the X250. The X250 was a early 2015 release, and of course it harkened in the era of 5th generation Intel CPUs and GPUs. On top of the new ClickPad, it also supported external monitors at a much higher resolution than the X240 did. We're looking at 3840 by 2160 at 60 Hertz. And if you are using external monitors or docking stations or any sort of setup, while the panels on these were better than the 240, especially the variety, it left a lot to be desired if you wanted to use this in a workstation scenario. This machine came in essentially 3 flavors of CPU. It came with the i3 5010U, it came with the i5 5200 and 5300U. This, by the way, is the 5200U variant. And then it also came in an i7 5600U variant. Regardless of which one of those you got, you were rocking the Intel HD Graphics 5500. Moving right along, there are a few other specifications we need to discuss. The displays in these came in a variety of different combinations. So you had your 1366 by 768 TN panel, then you had your 1366 by 768 IPS panel, you then had your 1366 by 768 IPS with touch panel, then you had your 1920 by 1080 IPS panel, and lastly you had your 1920 by 1080 IPS with touch display panel. Phew. This variant that we have in front of us is the 920 by 1080 IPS display, and I gotta say, it looks incredibly sharp, especially when we compare it against the X240. Officially, you were looking at 16 gigabytes of DDR3 low-power 1600 megahertz memory. There are currently 8 gigabytes of memory installed in this example that we have in front of us. It did include a 2.5-inch standard drive bay, but it also includes an M.2 SSD 42mm SATA bay as well, if you're not using that WLAN card slot. Some models that don't have the smart card slot can also hold a second single-sided M.2 drive. This one does have the smart card present, so unfortunately it does not have that additional M.2 bay. In terms of battery varieties, it's the same battery variety that was available on all PowerBridge models. It does have a 3-cell 23 watt-hour internal battery, and then you could get either a 23 watt-hour 3-cell, or you could get a 48 watt-hour or a 72 watt-hour 6-cell option. And the nice thing about these, if you were deploying these in a fleet, is that these batteries were all interchangeable with one another, which is incredibly convenient. It is worth mentioning, of course, though, that if the main battery is missing on any of the models, it does throttle CPU performance. The disassembly of the X250 is identical to the X240, however, we will quickly go through the basics. I will not be taking the keyboard out of this because that is a repair that you only want to have to do when absolutely necessary. The first thing that you will need to do is go into the BIOS and actually disable the internal battery. Once that is done, we can then safely turn the device over and actuate the 2 battery catches on the back, and then just gently push the external battery up and out. And this battery that we've got here is the 24 watt-hour thin style battery. Once that is out of the way, we can go ahead and grab our favorite screwdriver set and begin the disassembly process. We'll start over here in the top left-hand corner because why not? And then we'll just work our way down. Once all the screws have been loosened, we can go ahead and start to gently pry up on the plastic casing. And once we have the case off, we have literally laid bare pretty much all the parts that we would want to look at in service. So over here, we do have that 42mm M.2 bay ready and waiting for either a WAN card, which this clearly never had installed due to that off-colored yellow tape, usually a good indicator. And then over here, we do have our Wi-Fi card, and depending on the region that you find yourself in, that'll be a variety of different models. Over here we do have our RAM slot, easily available, staring us in the face. And as I mentioned earlier, it is an 8GB module, but we can install a 16GB module in there. On the bottom left-hand corner here, we do have our SATA 2.5-inch standard drive bay. Nothing really to see there. And then of course we have our internal battery. And realistically, everything that we would need to service and exchange or swap out is all very clearly visible. And we can tell just by looking at the interior of this one that it had a very, very easy life. Everything is really, really clean, and a lot of that tape is still there, probably from the manufacturer. So let's go ahead and reassemble this and do a few final comments and exploration with it. Okay, so let's go ahead and power this on and see it in its ThinkPad glory here. All right, and there we are. So a very respectable boot time. Once again, very responsive. Having these click buttons back is a joy, and the actual click on the trackpad itself is just nothing short of delightful. So regardless of which one you prefer, trackpoint or trackpad, this is a wonderful experience and really worth the cost of entry. So ladies and gentlemen, let's have some real conclusions here. In the year 2020, with all of these units coming off of their business warranties and showing up on the used market, there is really no reason to get the X240 when an X250 is available in your area. It is, in every measurable way that I can think of, the better machine to get. That does not make the X240 a bad machine, however. In its own right, this is still an excellent computer. Even despite that mushy trackpad, you know what? It's still a very, very good machine and serves its purpose. But again, I have to reiterate, with all of these machines now kind of coming out of their warranty period in the year 2020, I would strongly recommend that you seek out the X250 for the newer CPU, the better trackpad, and the higher support resolution for external displays. If you have any questions, I would encourage you to leave them in the comment section down below. And as always, I'm going to encourage you to do the big four. Please like the video, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so the next time that you see a ThinkPad X series video on the channel, you'll be the first person to see it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.